This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in New Zealand. You can email us at contact@aeanz.org.
Tonight, because it's the first Friday of the month, we're going to have a speaker, and that speaker is Louise.
Thanks, Leila. Hi, I'm Louise. I'm an addictive eater.
Hi, Louise.
So I have to apologise, a bit of a pickle at the start there. In all my 14 years, I've never seen such a pickle at the beginning of a meeting. So I just need to be a bit more organised. But it is always good, I think, when I'm in a situation that's kind of stressful, like rushing home to get the key because I bought the wrong key to get the stuff out of the locker, and knowing that there isn't much time and that you guys will all be here waiting for the meeting to start. It's like, that's the time I've got a choice. Am I going to lose the plot and get really stressed and be oh my godding, or am I just going to be able to drive home and get the key and just remain okay? And, you know, I am so grateful that I was able to pretty much remain okay. And that's, you know, that is something that is a gift of 14 years of, you know, working this program, being part of this fellowship, being sober off the food. I suppose I was thinking about, you know, I was trying to think earlier on today what my kind of like first food memory was, and some people have got very good memories for their childhood, but I don't really have sort of a lot of like clear memories. I can't even really think of anything particularly foodie jumping up. But the thing that really stands out to me when I think back is just that feeling of being different and odd and extremely self-conscious. And just the, you know, the pain of that horrible self-reflection all the time, you know, just at school, you know, dying 1,000 deaths if anybody looked at me, or if I had to speak in class, or, you know, my uniform, you know, skirt wasn't, you know, on my knee, or it wasn't in, you know, where everyone else's was, and I had the crappiest shoes. I had Charlie Browns and everyone else had Nomads. And Nomads were what the cool people had, and Charlie Browns were like what the poor people had. And, you know, just always this absolute, you know, gripped with an obsession about myself. And it was horrible. So, of course, I never, you know, really made friends or could participate very well. You know, at school, I don't remember, you know, I remember playing netball for a little while, but, you know, anything that was a team sport, it just absolutely wasn't me. And I was all sort of like, you know, I don't know, I probably dropped the ball a few times, and then I would have made some sort of decision that I was hopeless, just like I was hopeless at everything. And that was sort of the end of, you know, netball. So, yes, it wasn't much fun. You know, I just don't remember those school years as being very fun. And it's funny, I was looking online at somebody that I went to primary school with, and they made this comment about, oh, anyone that went to primary school with me, get in touch. They were the best years of my life. And I was like, oh my God. You know, it was terrible. It was terrible. I guess the bright spot in my years, particularly at primary school, at the Catholic school, was that Mum and Dad owned the fish and chip shop that delivered to the school. Oh my God, that wouldn't happen these days. But back then, I had fish and chips arrive every day for me for my school lunch. And I think it was cream buns on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I was just in heaven. That was wonderful. But yeah, it was a Catholic school, and I was very intensely Catholic. I was sort of all about mass and loved, you know, benediction, and there was incense and loved the nuns, and I used to faint quite regularly, and I was always sure there was something kind of, I don't know, there were saints doing something to me, I don't know. I always felt like I was on this sort of like slightly special kind of cloud. But, and I thought the nuns were amazing, and I really wanted to be a nun. And, you know, I used to read stories about saints and just, you know, that, you know, it was all about how self-sacrificing they were and how they did things for others with no sort of thought for themselves. And I was in awe, I think, of that sort of behaviour, because, you know, I just could not envision anything like that for myself. And we moved a bit. We moved quite a lot. So I went to several different schools, and every school I went to, I was less and less able to be part of, and more just sort of kept to myself. And our final move was in my 5th form year. We moved up to the North Island, and up till then I'd been like a sort of a quiet mouse and wouldn't say boo to a goose. And when I got to my 5th form year in this new high school, I just was like, it was just, you know, a total rebellion. I didn't want anything to do with doing the right thing anymore. I was just like, I was, you know, off. I was off. I was very unhappy, and I met another girl in my class who was also an unhappy girl. She's a girl who's now got a bipolar diagnosis, and I think it's very interesting because she's had struggles with alcohol all her life, and I certainly think there's a lot of addicts that end up with that diagnosis. They haven't come into a fellowship, and that's what it looks like when you're up and down a lot. And you know, I was up and down a lot. So her and I sort of went on a big rebellion, and that's when I first started eating and vomiting. That was sort of in those years, and I think I just thought that was very much just part of, you know, my teenage thing. I was sort of up to all sorts of things. You know, there was alcohol, there was sex, and there was the vomiting, binging and vomiting. And, you know, I left school and did some training and worked for a bit. I lived with my first boyfriend when I was 17. And I had the freedom, that was the first time I had the freedom to really eat whatever I wanted to eat, because up to then I'd always had to eat sort of secretly, and it was all about, you know, bite-sized, you know, bars under the pillow, under the bed, you know, hidden in my room, all very sort of, you know, not letting on to anyone that I had bought anything, not wanting to share anything, just wanting everything for myself. And once I was living with him, it was like, you know, I could just really start eating the way I really wanted to eat. And so up to then I wasn't terribly overweight, but when we went to Wellington and lived together, I just cooked and cooked and cooked and ate and ate and ate and just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I wasn't vomiting so much. I wasn't, you know, I'd done the sort of binging and vomiting, and then that had sort of died away, and it was just eating. And that was when the misery, I suppose in my late teens, early 20s, that I was just so miserable, so incredibly miserable, because I was just getting so huge. But I couldn't stop eating, and I used to go to bed at night, and I hated myself. And I used to pray, and you know, ask Jesus, because I was a Christian then, you know, I'm so sorry, Jesus, for all the bad things I've done, and I thought I was such a sinner, and blah, 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 and this eating thing, you know, please let me not do that tomorrow, please let me eat salad sandwiches, I'm going to have salad sandwiches, I'm going to have fruit, I'm going to have water. And I'd look down and I'd see my great big thighs, and I'd be slapping my thighs and slapping my face, and I just hated myself and crying. And the next morning, you know, when I woke up, that pitiful person was gone, and I just could not wait to eat. And so that just went, you know, round and round, and that was just horrible. And I was working, I think that was my first job, in a bank, and yeah, gosh, I could hardly turn up. I had so many sick days at that bank. I was the worst employee. So I decided to go travelling. I thought travelling would be the answer, and that's when I started. I went travelling when I was 21, left my boyfriend, went travelling. I left at 21, came back at, I think, 29. Went to Australia for a couple of years, in the UK for a few more years. And that was just all like eating just progressing, my eating progressing and my misery progressing. And all still with this kind of belief that if I got a different job or a different boyfriend or lived in a different country, that somehow things might improve and might get better. And, that just never happened. So I got back into the binging and vomiting. That sort of came back, once I was overseas. I started controlling my weight. I could not bear being overweight. I just could not tolerate the weight. And so I started big time binging and vomiting. And I suppose by then I was in my sort of like mid-20s and I was in London, and I just, I was working as a secretary. I was smoking a lot of hash by then, and extremely excessively miserable. And so I saw an ad in a paper, Loot, it used to be the Loot, and it had sort of like, I don't know, things for sale, situations vacant, I don't know, all those sort of things. It had this therapist in the back. And this therapist had sort of written this line, something, "Are you unhappy with your life?" And I was just like, absolutely, I am unhappy with my life. I just remember wanting to be dead. Not making serious suicide attempts, but having big thought things about suicide. I could do this, and then Mum would really, be sad that she hadn't been kind to me when I was a child, and everybody would be sad and they'd realise, poor Louise. And so all of that suicidalness was about sort of trying to punish everyone, because I blamed everyone for how miserable I was, particularly Mum, who I thought hadn't been, loving enough. So I went along and saw this therapist, and she was an Irish woman, and that started, I think, 4 years of Gestalt therapy, which is all about getting out all that anger and stuff. So I, with the bat and the pillow, I, bashed pillows and screamed. And her, the person that lived underneath her actually, after a couple of years, complained, and I wasn't allowed to scream and bash anymore. But after 4 years, I never felt any better, That, are you unhappy still applied to me just as much at the end as it had in the beginning. But, of course, being an addict and being so self-centred, I loved going along there every week and talking about myself and my problems and my issues and my childhood and why I'd done this and why I'd done that, and it was all very fascinating. And maybe one day I'd get to the bottom of why, little Louise, who was so hurt and wounded, maybe I'd get to the bottom of it and I'd be all right. But, of course, that never went anywhere at all. But the good thing that came out of that was that this therapist actually had a guru, a spiritual teacher, and so at one point she gave me a meditation tape, not with any intention really of that I had to take this man on as my spiritual master or anything, but just that it might help me. And so I remember taking that tape home and putting it on the little tape player, and this man talking, and it was like for the first time in my life, something made sense, and it was just this like most pivotal moment. Because up to then I had just been, like Janelle talks about, did not have the instruction book, didn't know how to get on with people, didn't know how to talk to people, didn't know how to have a partner, didn't know anything about life. And not that this man was talking about that in particular, but he was just talking about, self, and he was talking about God, and he was talking about God within, and living a life of being present and I don't know, the whole thing just really completely resonated with me, and it just started me off on this whole other kind of seeking, I suppose. And I'd had my earlier years where I was, very intensely Catholic, but I'd dropped all of that. But it was that same sort of intensity of searching for something sort of came back, and I was really glad because it gave my sort of very empty life some sort of meaning. And so the rest of the years I was in England, I was very much pursuing that kind of spiritual path. And then I met this man who was with that spiritual fellowship, but he was all about health food. And so I lived with him, and our life became all about raw food, organic food, only shopped at the health food shop, lots and lots of supplements, fasting, enemas. We were just all about cleansing. And I thought, this is what you're supposed to do. I was so unenlightened about food. Now this is how you're supposed to be, and now I'm good with food, But actually, while, the health food boyfriend was out at work, I'd be down the supermarket buying great big binges and loading up, reading the paper while I was eating, because I could never just sit with the food and eat the food. I had to be reading the paper, eating the food, going and getting rid of all the food. Then he would come back and I'd be all glazed in the eyes and, absolutely full of self-loathing, and, he would wonder why I was so angry, and I was so angry at him, and I picked at him. Nothing he did was all right. Everything he did was wrong, and he most certainly didn't love me enough, and he wasn't good enough to me, and he wasn't man enough, and he wasn't anything. And, it was just horrible. The poor guy, it was terrible. So we were endeavouring to live this sort of spiritual life, and I was this mad, crazy woman, and the disease was progressing. I was just absolutely horrible. By then I was living illegally there because I'd overstayed my working visa, so I couldn't work anywhere proper, so I'm doing little scummy jobs for cash, and the whole thing was just very horrible. So I came back to New Zealand, and I went to live in Nelson and decided that I would do some training. I did some training there, and I remember that eating really sort of died away a bit there. I left the health food man in England. Quite soon after I arrived in Nelson, I met a woman who was a sort of very alternative woman, and I flattered with her, and her boyfriend was quite into drugs, and so in Nelson I got quite into drugs, and that was very interesting. So not so much eating, but the drugs were really, really big in my life, and I could sort of do that because I was studying, and I didn't have to front up to a job or sort of appear to be normal or anything, so I really got quite heavily into the drugs there. And it was while I was there that I could see that who I was a million miles from who I wanted to be when I first listened to that tape from that enlightened man and tried to live that teaching. And so I remember at that point giving up on that spiritual teaching and feeling like that's such, I can't do spirituality, I can't do anything. So I managed to do that training and met my alcoholic partner there, and we came down to Christchurch and we had a baby, and I went back to work after our child was 1, and because when I was pregnant and when I'd had my baby, I couldn't do the drugs and the alcohol anymore. Food really took off again, and I remember going back to work, and after work coming back to McDonald's, buying the burgers, the chips, the shake, eating it all, sitting in front of the house, needing to go back inside because I've finished work, but with all this food and me vomiting it back up into the McDonald's bag, scrunching up the top, driving around, looking for rubbish bins to dump it in. And then, when I was at home, going to the supermarket, getting binges, coming back, the baby's asleep in the cot, I'm in the lounge, gorging on, Ernest Adams slices and, bulk lamingtons and things, and vomiting, and, it just was horrible. It was horrible. And at the same time, still not getting any better with my relationships with people, still couldn't talk to people, still had no friends, still didn't know how to do life. I've got this partner that's off on alcoholic benders, he's sleeping under bushes in the city, and it's just, my life is not looking like I thought it was going to look, and it's just looking actually really terrible. And, it was kind of when all of that came together that I sort of gave up. I gave up on ever coming right, getting better, growing up, and I just sort of thought that's it, I'm going to be a complete no-hoper, never do anything, never get anywhere, never be liked, never have a friend, okay, I give up, that's it. And I felt a bit sad about that, but I kind of thought, oh well, I'd sort of given up, I just couldn't be bothered anymore, it was all too hard. Very soon after that, I saw the 15 questions thing in the library, and I am so surprised I could even be bothered, but I thought, I'll do a bit of therapy for my food thing, I suppose. I didn't hold out any hope whatsoever, but I suppose I sort of had maybe a last tiny bit of therapy in me. So I came along to the Wednesday meeting, ready to cry and tell you what a terrible life I'd had and how Mum hadn't loved me enough, and and of course here was these people sitting talking about the disease of addiction and being addicts and food addicts, and that they had this recovery and they were sober off the food and they weren't having to do what they'd done previously, and it wasn't, they hadn't done it, it had happened, it was, they'd sort of surrendered, it was a gift, and the gift was by a higher power. So the whole thing was just a complete, absolute reverse of what I thought was going to be here. And very stunning and very surprising, and very unglamorous, like I've said before. Nobody was chanting Hare Krishna, and there was, nobody yelling or dancing, and, it was all just very low-key, but it was, I knew pretty much straight away there was something here that was really amazing that I didn't have, and, that thing that I didn't have was that peace. There was just so much peace here. And I remember being able to sort of see that in the older members. I could just see this sort of light in their faces, and I just remember, it being a very, amazing place to be. And of course I heard quite early that I had to find a sponsor, and I got myself a sponsor, and I found it very, very difficult to be sponsored because I had lots of old ideas that I didn't want to give up. And I didn't want to be told what to do because I was 37 and, I thought I knew a thing or two about life, and I obviously knew nothing. And so that first couple of years, although, the eating quite quickly, quite quickly I didn't have to eat. And so that, miracle happened sort of fairly quickly. The struggle with my willfulness and my wanting to live life on my own terms and the way I wanted to was extremely strong, and it was a real, it was just a real hard thing to ring my sponsor day after day. And, there were lots of times when I was rolling my eyes and tutting, and I hung up on her a few times, which she told me if I kept on with that, she wasn't prepared to sponsor me anymore. And I was told that the doors were open and I could leave if I wanted to. And in the end, it was no skin off my sponsor's nose if I stayed or went. You know, it was me that was going to miss out, and, you know, that became evident. And so, thank God my sponsor was prepared to, you know, listen to me, and, you know, she talked a lot about recovery and what recovery was. She talked a lot about, you know, addicts and sort of normal people, and it just became more and more clear to me that my life wasn't, you know, that life wasn't the way I thought it was, that life in fact was very different. And then doing things like step 4 and 5 and 8 and 9, you know, where my whole view of myself as a victim and poor me and how awful mum was, that whole thing completely changed. And I was able to see that, oh my God, you know, I'm an addict, and, you know, the way I had been in my life, and, you know, I you know, no wonder things happened like they happened, and you know, all that blame, all that terrible blame, you know, it went, and there was a lot more space in my head after that, and a lot more space in my life to, I don't know, start to get well, start to really, you know, do the things that we do here, start to put the program first as much as possible. And I have a son who has Asperger's, and so those years that I was, you know, doing the hard yards and working the steps, you know, he had all his kind of behaviours, which of course I struggled with quite a lot and found, you know, quite difficult, but my sponsor was completely amazing, and, you know, the message I always got, you know, was the things we hear all the time: I'll never be given more than I can handle in a day, and that I'm not alone, and that, you know, to just go and get on my knees and, you know, ask God for help, to ring people in the fellowship, and, you know, it just, you know, I don't know, I wasn't ever alone, and there just always was just this absolute, you know, wonderful support from the fellowship. And so, you know, no matter how sort of hard it was, and I sat here in a lot of meetings and cried, and, you know, found it all very difficult and life very difficult, you know, it was always amazing that I wasn't eating, you know, and I was always grateful to be sober, and it was always great to hear people, you know, talking about their recovery and their lives, and yeah, that was so amazing. And so now my son doesn't live at home, of course, anymore, and so, you know, I get to have more time to sort of do things that, you know, I really enjoy, which is really lovely. And, you know, I get to have that conscious contact with my higher power, which, you know, was something that I got to reconnect with through this program. And, you know, that's just such a, I guess, big part of who I am now as well, as is working the program. I don't even think so much these days about the steps or the program or my higher power. Or it just, I feel like I just get up and I just live the day, and who I am now is the program and the steps and my higher power. It just is. And so, yeah, this is just the greatest life. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.